Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Marcus Wråke. I've got the pleasure to moderate this session today, and welcome also to you online. We have a full room here in Storgatan 5, but you're as welcome online. Just before I hand over to Pia Sandvik, the CEO of Teknikföretagen, who's hosting this event, just a few practicalities. We have emergency exit here to the right of me and where you came in. We're going to be on time. We'll finish at 11:30. There'll be time for questions around 10 to 11. So start thinking about those gnarly questions for Timur and the panelists right now. I think that's it. When we have the Q&A, you in the room, please wait for the microphone because otherwise you won't be heard online. The report, if you haven't read already, please go to the IEA's website, iea.org. There's a wealth of information and tools there to explore the data further. It's really great. So if you haven't done already, you've got a nice experience in front of you. So with that, please take the floor, Pia Sandvik from Teknikföretagen. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marcus. We are very happy to have you as a moderator today. I couldn't think about anybody better suited for this for the moment. A very warm welcome to this launch of the Energy Technology Perspectives, the flagship technology report from the International Energy Agency. I'm Pia Sandvik. I'm the CEO of Technology Industries of Sweden. And I'm very happy to welcome you all to this office. It's been popular to come to this seminar, I have to tell you. But also very warm welcome to all the participants online, because this seminar is also streamed to a wider audience than the ones here in this room. I will keep this introduction very short. I'll come back later. And to say that we are, of course, very pleased to have Dr. Timur Gül here, IEA's Chief Technology Officer. I think that's the correct title, isn't it? You're here to present the report today, so we're very eager to hear what you have to say, of course. And you have been for decades the leading voice of all that has to do with trends, energy trends. And I have to tell you, I went to China last week. We talked about that just a few minutes ago, and it's breathtaking. So it's really going to be interesting to see, and looking forward to the discussions as well at what because you present some of the results also connected to a global perspective, of course. So a warm welcome to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pia, for hosting us here today and the kind introduction. Many thanks, Marcus, as well, old colleague and friend. Thanks for doing the moderation here today. Also really happy to see so many of the IEA alumni here. I see Bo, there's Anna, there's Philip, and many more. So really nice to have all of you here today. Of course, the representatives from Riksdagen industry, really looking forward to the discussion with you today. Big thanks to Oscar for setting all this up here and all the great work. I don't know how many of you know about this, but as Pia was talking about decades ago, I was a master's student here in Stockholm, so I'm particularly happy to be back here today. A lot of fond memories. But as I have very limited time to talk through a 400 pages report, and I will already need to disappoint you that I will not be able to cover everything, I will try to start right away. This report is about clean energy technologies. Now, we conceive it as the world's guidebook on clean energy technologies. It's not a report that tells you this is your technology or you should be doing that, etc. But it takes a pedagogical approach. I myself, this is actually the 20 years anniversary of the Energy Technology Perspectives publication at the IEA. It was first released in 2006. I myself benefited a lot as a PhD student later on from this particular report and the wealth of information that came out of it. And so one of the things that when I was appointed head of this team in 2018, one of the things I really wanted to retain is that pedagogical approach. That we're not only making it more policy relevant, the technology for the technology debate, but also retain some of that pedagogical element that's always been there. And one of the things to really educate on, first and foremost, is the fact that technologies, clean energy technologies, when I was a PhD student, when I was a master's student here at KTH, or when the ETP itself was established, clean energy technologies were very much a climate story. But today, this is just not the case. It's a real market, an industrial opportunity in many ways. The main market here is worth roughly 1.2 trillion US dollars. You derive it by multiplying volume times price, so it's a very easy proxy to understand. The main market here is with technologies that underpin what we refer to at the IEA as the age of electricity. So technologies like solar PV and wind that can help you to decarbonize the power sector, or technologies like electric cars, batteries, heat pumps, etc., that can help enable electrification of end-use sectors. All these technologies have seen remarkable cost reductions over the last 10, 15 years or so, and as a result are now mainstream in many and cost-effective in many markets around the world. There has been a lot of discussion last year in particular about potential policy reversals, what they would mean. Would that actually slow down clean energy technology deployment? And one of the key messages that we wanted to bring home with this particular report is that irrespective of if you pursue climate targets, this is not about normative scenarios, but if you look into in an exploratory sense through what policies that are today in place would actually be suggesting for the future of clean energy technologies, that there is no indication of a reversal. Quite the opposite. The market for clean energy technologies, multiplying price times volume, is actually set to grow regardless of the exploratory scenario that you're looking at. We do that at the IEA in two ways. One is a more conservative interpretation, so there is no additional policy being implemented, the current policy scenario above and beyond what is already in place today. And even here, the market value basically doubles over the next decade. And when you take into account policy announcements that have been formally tabled but not yet been implemented, then you see the market opportunity, the market value of these technologies growing even further. There are more clean energy technologies, of course, than just those that underpin that age of electricity. Think of clean fuels here, for example, is a much smaller market today, around 215 billion US dollars, which is set to grow in both scenarios, roughly doubling over the next decade. The main opportunity here in clean fuel space is with biofuels. They're most readily available in the market. They are being used for quite some time already. They are drop-in fuels into existing infrastructure, so they're being widely used, and they have a lot of policy support in many countries. There are others, of course. Think of low-emission hydrogen, for example, a technological opportunity, an energy vector that has received enormous attention over the last couple of years, perhaps a bit too much when you think about all the targets that have been set that were a bit sky high and that have led to a sentiment in the market that this is failing, is not coming about. This is not supported by data. No, we've seen an 80% jump year on year last year alone in terms of the growth of low-emission hydrogen deployment. So there's a lot of things happening in that space as well. The lower part here, clean materials, this is what we think of when we are thinking about near-zero emission steel, near-zero emission cement, etc. Is a tiny market today. It is a bit like hydrogen a couple of years ago. It got a lot of attention, policy attention, public attention in recent years. The buzzword here is industry decarbonization, and of course is an important area from a climate perspective in particular. But all that attention has so far not yet materialized in operational projects on the ground, large-scale projects. There is a strong and steadily growing project pipeline. It is led by Europe and the Middle East when it comes to steel, Europe and North America for cement, and North America and Africa for ammonia. But under existing and planned policies, we're yet to see some growth here. It's just not strong enough support, and too many technologies that are still waiting to make it into the market. Now, there are many reasons why clean energy technologies have become what they are today, a market opportunity, demand side policies, innovation, etc., etc. But certainly one of the key drivers has been investment in manufacturing. It's an area that has been overlooked for many years. We've started championing this at the IEA and in this technology publication around 2023, there has been a huge boom in manufacturing capacity over the past couple of years. It reached $200 billion per year by 2023 and has been falling back gradually since, largely because there is already so much capacity installed. We have ample production capacity for solar PV and batteries in particular. Some of these factories are running at 20% or even less capacity factor today, just because there's less demand. It's a strong demand, but it's still much less demand than what we can actually be producing. What you see is that there are thousands of facilities around the world in about 50 countries around the world that can produce these range of clean energy technologies that you see here. But of course, these facilities differ very much in terms of the quality of the products that they produce, but also just in terms of the size at which they can operate. When you look at this in terms of production output, you can see that the picture is much less geographically dispersed than the sheer amount of factories. It's actually heavily concentrated on one country alone, which is China. China today produces 80% of the world's solar PV modules, 80% of the battery cells, around 70% of electric cars, and 3/4 of wind nacelles. So it's the major player, the one country that is dominating the production of clean energy technologies today. And when you look at all the projects that have been planned around the world, there is really no expectation for this to change in the near term. I'll come back to that point in a little while. Now, these are many percentage points, but sometimes a bit of a real-world consideration explains that level of concentration a bit more in detail. And you can see this very well when you look at the corporate level. Take solar PV as an example. The largest company producing solar PV modules today is the Chinese company Jinko Solar. Its production, this company has enough production capacity to comfortably supply today's demand of the entire Europe. So one company alone. You can see the same thing when it comes to wind. The largest producer here is also China-based, is Envision Energy. It could supply, in theory, the demand of both of the Americas, North and South America, taken together today comfortably many times over. The largest corporate concentration is perhaps in the battery sector, where the biggest company is called CATL. You may see it in the news these days for yet breaking another record. But this company alone could theoretically supply all of the demand for battery cells outside China on its own for the entire world. I think these are just a couple of numbers that give you a good sense for just how deep that geographical concentration is actually today. Now, of course, geographical concentration is not unique to clean energy technologies. We see this in many different areas. Think about fossil fuels, think about critical minerals refining, etc. What is unique, though, and is very important for the interpretation of policy efforts that can be undertaken in order to deal with the situation, is that these are technologies. These are not fuels. These are technologies, and these are technologies that are built of different individual components, which in and of themselves are also manufactured goods. So this is very important when it comes to understanding how to deal with the resilience of supply chains moving forward. Anyone who has ever looked, and I know there are many colleagues from the industry here in the room, has ever looked, and for them supply chain thinking is a bit bread and butter of every day. But everyone who has ever looked into understanding the resilience of a supply chain knows that a supply chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And the way to assess that in the energy sector, think about power, fossil fuels, etc., is a so-called N-1 analysis, where you take away from the system the largest supplier, irrespective of the cause, if it's a country or a company. And when you do that for the battery and electric car supply chain, you take away the largest producer, so China. What you find is that without China on the supply and the demand side, the rest of the world has enough, more or less, enough production capacity today in place in order to produce electric cars and batteries to the extent that we're actually demanding it at an annual level. So it looks like a comfortable situation, and this is because there has been a lot of investment in this final end of the supply chain, where the most economic activity is actually sitting. But when you extend that view and when you look more carefully into other steps of the supply chain, you see that the picture becomes very, very quickly very different. There are some clear vulnerabilities. Of course, in the critical mineral space, refining, I think this is a topic that we have been dealing with and championing at the IEA for quite some time already. But very importantly here, also in the midstream part, there is a part, cathode precursors, where less than 25% of rest of the world demand, so demand outside China, could be supplied without China. And of course, it is very nice to have a battery factory or electric car factory somewhere, but if you don't have access to those individual components, what are you going to do with your factory? And of course, China has been using export controls in the past. It's an active and live policy debate in many ways. The question that arises from this is, of course, why does it matter? I mean, I'm working at the IEA. I'm an energy security person first and foremost, and in energy security terms, having access or not for some time to a battery or an electric car or something is a very different thing than having access to fossil fuels. As a stock versus flow problem for those who are more in the analytical space. Take an example here, solar PV. One ship carrying solar PV panels will be able to bring you as much electricity over the lifetime of these solar PV panels as 50 LNG tankers. So it gives you a very different energy security benefit to use those clean energy technologies. But this here is an economic security consideration, because these are jobs, this is economic output. A disruption in 1 month in the battery supply chain from China is equivalent to an output value of $17 billion for producing electric cars. So it's a massive economic security issue, and it's an economic security issue in this particular supply chain that affects Europe first and foremost, because we rely the most on batteries from China. As I said earlier, there is no anticipation for this risk to go away. When you look at the production capacity, the project pipeline that has been announced, this is a picture for 2030, not an IEA scenario. It is just how projects underway are currently being put together. So we don't see any way for this to be alleviated in the very short term. It's not a problem that is unique to the electric car or battery supply chain. This 25% number, if you want to retain one thing from today's presentation, remember that number, because there's always in every single supply chain for clean energy technologies, there's at least one step where the rest of the world can only produce less than 1/4 of demand without China. In solar PV, it's wafers, heat pumps, it's rotary compressors, and so on and so on. So this resilience or this vulnerability of supply chains in the clean energy technology space is extremely widespread in the clean energy technology space. This is where trade comes in, of course. The reason why these vulnerabilities exist is, of course, because we are trading, and trading is a good thing. It helps you to grow your economy, specialize, etc., make the most out of global resources in many ways. Of course, trade has been under pressure. It was a bit of a, 2025 was very much a highly dynamic trade policy environment, if I can call it this way. There were trade tensions, falling technology prices, but despite all that, the value of trade in clean energy technologies actually reached a new record last year, despite these trade tensions, despite the falling cost of these technologies. Chinese exports, China is obviously the largest exporter in this space. They reached $165 billion. If you put this in context of their overall goods trade surplus, which was 1.2 trillion, then you understand the economic value for China. Roughly 15% of the overall goods trade plus surplus in China is associated with clean energy technology exports. Now, these technologies now feature in trade balances worldwide, actually, but we can ignore most of the regions here. Let's focus on China and the European Union right now. The oil import bill or oil trade bill is much larger than than is the import bill or export surplus when it comes to clean energy technologies today. But of course, today's trade for clean energy technologies is tomorrow's trade for oil. It impacts it one way or another. And when you look at existing and announced policies, then you see some very interesting things happening. And this is taking into account all the industrial policies that have been adopted, Net Zero Industry Act in the European Union, production-linked incentive scheme in India, et cetera, as well as all these tariffs, trade barriers that have been put up. What you see is that the value of clean energy technology exports for China is growing massively. Is reaching a level by 2035 that is equivalent to the combined crude oil export revenues from all OPEC countries last year. There's a massive value, and it's basically the same as what they are spending in terms of import on oil. For Europe, what you see here is we're more or less spending the same in 10 years of time under existing and announced policies on imports of clean energy technologies as well as oil. But there's a shift that is taking place here, away slightly from oil and more towards clean energy technologies. And here, there are you can wear two hats as a policymaker. If you're the energy security policymaker, you'll be happy with that, because you have turned a flow of imports into a stock issue. So it makes that vulnerability to international price volatility, etc. It reduces it somewhat. You of course have domestic issues to deal with, how to integrate solar PV, etc. as another energy security consideration, but you shield yourself somewhat from international markets. So energy security, there is a lot of upside in importing more clean energy technologies. But when you're dealing with industrial policy, you want to have these technologies homegrown. And this is perhaps not what you have desired when you started designing your policies. Now, the outsized role of China for clean energy technologies and for all of us that have been deploying that around the world cannot be overstated in many different ways. So cannot the economic vulnerabilities, cybersecurity questions that come with it, and many more. But conversely, and it's important to keep in mind, for Chinese clean tech industry, access to the market of other countries is also vitally important. And you can see this in data when you look at historical trends. The Chinese solar PV industry has grown 13-fold over the last decade to reach nearly 0.5 terawatt per year. About today, a lot of that went into satisfying domestic demand, the red part here, but 40% went into export. So part of the reason why the Chinese industry became so large in the solar PV space is because everyone was happy to import the solar PV modules from China. It's a phenomenon that we are seeing elsewhere when you're looking into the outlook under existing and announced policies. For battery cells, electric cars, heat pumps, we are seeing 40 to 50% of the expected growth in this industry that this industry wants to achieve in order to grow further is reliant on access to other markets. And this is the rest of the world, but if we are honest, this is by and large advanced economies, and it's by and large Europe, the largest market far and away. So what this is, of course, there are many different policies that can be implied. This is a snapshot of what could happen on the basis of existing announced policies today. And of course, policies can change. Many new policies can be adopted in order to affect that picture one way or another. But what this is a reminder of how closely interwoven energy policy is with industrial policy and trade policy. There are strategic interdependencies between countries in international markets, and designing policies accordingly will be, I think, the challenge for the next 10 years or so. Now, there are many different reasons why China has such an outsized role in the clean energy technology market. We can talk about this for many more hours. We even started with that with Pia when we before the event even. So there are many things to talk about. But one important factor is competitiveness. And there are many different factors, of course, that shape competitiveness at the firm level. But what we have looked at is the production costs. And this is not something that the IEA was analyzing in their spreadsheets, but we surveyed hundreds of different individual manufacturing projects from around the world, and a lot of them actually from China, in order to understand the specific factors that actually underpin China's cost advantage today. At the highest level, you can see, and this is already an aggregate figure, no? We have broken this down to many more individual components, but at the highest level, you can see that relative to the European Union, China can produce every single technology 30 to 65% cheaper than Europe. It's a very staggering number in many different ways. It's very similar, by the way, to other regions, slight variations depending on the general context. Is not a European Union or Europe alone type of perspective, but this is basically where we are. 30 to 65% cheaper are these projects to manufacture in China than in Europe. But when you dig in more deeply into the factors that underpin this difference, you can see that this is very varied. People very quickly, when it comes to discussing China, point to individual things. No, it's subsidies, or it's labor costs, or it's this or that. No, it's always one thing, but this is not the way it is. Of course, there's a truth in every single one of them, but the reality is that plant construction equipment, labor cost, energy cost, component cost, automation, so manufacturing efficiency, plant size, etc. There are many, many different factors that are at play here that explain why China is able to produce these technologies cheaply. And I'm not even saying, I mean, this is, they're also very good in doing that. No, these are very good technologies that they are producing, but in all of them, they can produce them more cheaply. So a very messy picture, a lot of colors here, but I think what is very instructive is that you can find key patterns for each and every single technology. And there is always one factor that is a bit the largest. You know, it's always useful. Everyone who has worked on energy and more analytically always tries to look at where's the biggest fish here. And there is a biggest fish that is always different in every single technology. For solar PV, the biggest factor that explains the cost difference between Chinese production and European production is energy costs. This is by and large because some of the steps, in particular wafer and polysilicon production, are extremely energy intensive, and so access to cheap electricity is actually a huge factor that helps you to be competitive. In the wind space, it is by and large labor cost. It is somewhat evident here for blade manufacturing, but also nacelle production, where components like gearboxes and generators are technologically complex, material intensive, and require skilled labor. Labor costs weigh very, very heavily on the final cost. In batteries here, the largest factor is manufacturing efficiency, and I'm under the watch of Ilka here, so that I'm not saying something wrong. But the Chinese production is highly automatized. It's very much, it's almost a perfect process in producing batteries. You can see this in one number, which is the yields, the average yields that a factory in China achieves. In China, above 90%, the average yield rate is above 90%, meaning that less than 1 in 10 batteries fail the quality test at the end of production. In Europe, it's 2 to 3 times larger. So automation, manufacturing efficiency is explaining a large part of the cost gap between China and other countries. Now, in many ways, for those who are dealing with industrial policy today, especially here in Europe, this will be a bit of a daunting, if not depressing picture. So we thought, what's the solution space? Well, I mean, and there are no easy solutions, I must say that right up front. But it's important when you're discussing solutions that the reality will be that most of the countries will not be able to close this competitiveness gap on their own. It is very important to close the competitiveness gap as much as possible. To my mind, competitiveness is a key stumbling block for any policy goal that you have ahead of yourself. Energy policy goals, climate policy, economic security, and all the various different other ones. So trying to find a way to close that competitiveness gap as much as possible is strategically important for countries around the world, but it's also important to acknowledge that you cannot do that just by yourself. This is where strategic partnerships come in, of course. It's a bit of a buzzword at times in these type of policy circles. So if you cannot do it by yourself, do it with someone else in a way. So what we've been trying to look at here is what does it actually concretely mean? What could be specific examples of doing that? And we try to do that from the basis of the previous picture, where we have identified the key vulnerabilities in the competitiveness gap. And when you take solar PV, for example, and you keep in mind that energy costs, because of the highly energy intensive nature of upstream production, is a key factor here, then you go to regions which have lower energy costs. Middle East, of course, North Africa, there are already facilities to produce these type of components in place. You will not be able to close the entire cost gap here. There's roughly 40% that you're bringing it down. But if you're keeping in mind that the manufacturing costs are only 20% roughly of the final installation cost for solar PV, then you see that it's actually worthwhile doing. You're bringing your technology a bit closer to competitiveness gap, and you're not raising the cost of the transition significantly as the result. In the context of wind, there are other countries that have important wind industries already in place today. Labor cost, as I said, weigh most heavily on China's cost advantage here, and India is a promising example, promising potential partner, which has a long-established role in the global wind industry, is home to several turbine and gearbox manufacturers, and our assessment is that there are many additional factors in their final product prices, don't get me wrong, but in terms of cost of production, they can get reasonably close to China already today. So partnerships is not something where you say, let's be partners with everyone, no? And don't go to a country that currently doesn't have it. Of course, this is a very admirable and certainly very positive thing to do, that you want to work with countries and build up their industries. But if you need to move quickly in this space. And if you want to move quickly, go to those who can do it, or who are already active in this space, have an industrial base to build upon, and have competitiveness advantages to add to your own current situation. I would like to close my presentation with a view on innovation. It's not coming straight out of the Energy Technology Perspectives series, but is coming out of a new report series that we have developed over the last 2 years. It's called State of Energy Innovation. The reason why we did this report is we believe that innovation is a key factor to anything that any of our policy goals too, but certainly towards competitiveness. And so we wanted to make sure that we give policymakers as many data points as possible to understand the state of energy innovation and the role that innovation actually plays for achieving policy goals. And I would like to start here with one simple picture that explains how innovation plays out and why our executive director always talks about technology development being a marathon that you don't win when you're first after 10 kilometers, but that you win when you're first after 42 kilometers. And I can tell you, I ran a marathon many years ago. It's true. The solar PV example is probably well understood already, but it's the same in batteries. Battery research really started in earnest in the response to the global oil crisis. There was a lot of public R&D behind it. It's the critical factor, in fact, to the development of any technology is public R&D. In the wake of the global oil crisis in the 1970s, IEA member countries boosted their R&D spending to 0.1% of GDP. Today it's only half of that, which is a very surprising development in view of just how significant the situation is. There were many researchers across France, UK, Italy, and there are many more, of course. No, I don't want to discredit anyone here. United States, Japan, etc., that were involved in advancing the technology, understanding it better, but it ultimately, and it's not even after 10 kilometers that China picked up. No? If this is the 42, it's more the last 10, no? Where they mastered the manufacturing of these technologies, scaled it, continued to improve the technology, continue to invest into other chemistries that are now dominating the market and are now championing the global $140 billion US per year market overall. So investing in research is a good thing, but also making sure that industrial policy plays out correctly, that you're scaling up at the right point in time is just as important for technology success. And it's not a story, battery in particular is not a story that has ended. Not just because there are so excellent and cheap batteries now in the market doesn't mean that the innovation cycle is ending here. What you actually see is, and we've started working with the European Patent Office in order to understand better the patent situation, in order to give a bit of a hint what might be coming in the future. When you look at, and one of the biggest surprises I had, to be honest, when looking into this, is that the energy sector is actually an innovation powerhouse. 1 in 10 patents worldwide is associated with the energy sector, which is larger than those sectors that we typically consider as particularly innovative, like pharmaceuticals, etc. So it's a very important powerhouse for energy innovation. But batteries played a very small role there 25 years ago or so. No, just very few patents. When you fast forward to today, almost half of the patents in the energy sector are actually associated with batteries. It's a share that is as high as anything. We've never seen anything like that before. There's no precedence for this high share for any single technology in patent data. And it's not something that one country is championing. Everyone is trying to work on these technologies. So the interplay between RD&D here and pushing it into the market, scaling it up over time is extremely important for manufacturing success of the future. And the fact that innovation continues, you may think, okay, the guy is telling me this now, but what of that is actually going to make it into the market? I don't know too. I mean, these are just patents. Not every patent becomes a huge factory in the end. Obviously, I understand that. But in every single technology, we are recording these things. Take solar PV as an example, where just 25 years ago, there was very limited patent activity, very stable R&D public budget. And at some point, the technology started to deliver. In particular, crystalline silicon sales started to deliver. You had investment coming in with a 3 years time lag, and then all of a sudden you had a peak in patents. Patents fell back. No, patents grew enormously as the manufacturing opportunities started coming in. But then patent activities started falling back. But what is important here is that there is a new prioritization that is taking place. It's perovskites. I don't know if you know about this technology. It's a technology that is researched a lot in Asia. Japan, for example, is an important countries here because of higher efficiencies that it can take up, it can achieve. It is also linked to taking up less space. So there's something looming here when you look at R&D efforts. And making the right steps in order to help technologies into the market is one of the ways to deal with that competitiveness challenge that you have with China as well as other countries. I'd like to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining us and for the attention. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Timur. Before we continue with a few more comments here, just a few questions. You've worked with this type of analysis for a long time. Was there anything particular that surprised you in this report?
I have to say the supply chain work is a surprise every year now. To be honest, we haven't looked into the supply chains in that level of detail up until the 2023 edition of Energy Technology Perspectives, where we first identified that level of geographical concentration. But what has really puzzled me to learn over the years is just how important it is for policymakers to understand and to realize how connected their individual policy areas are. I mean, I'm sure this is the case in every single company and in every single ministry, as it is at times with the IEA too, that we work in our individual areas and in our individual pockets. But what China has achieved is to integrate industrial policy with innovation policy, with demand-side policy. And this is the biggest lesson for me to learn, not only from this ETP edition, but the last 3, I would say. And every time we come up with a new number, the competitiveness gap this year around, I'm stunned how effective such policy making can be. Many other factors, of course, in China at play here. We're not comparing like for like, don't get me wrong, but I found this very enlightening inside.
And just you finished with this discussion around the role of public R&D and how basically every technology in the clean energy space that we now take for granted has been sort of triggered by some public R&D initiative. What gaps do you see right now that could, especially in Europe, given our context, that could kind of close some of the deficiencies that we see in our competitiveness?
So in Europe, we are very good at doing R&D, to be honest. We have a very good research system, very good universities here, many good think tanks. Europe has also become much better in recent years in terms of startups. The number of startups has actually overtaken the United States, which in itself is quite something. But we are failing to scale these startups. We're failing to scale our innovations into the market. European startups raise enormous amount of venture capital in their first round of bidding, but they fail to raise similar levels in the second round of bidding. So we are still not managing to bring our great ideas into a market opportunity.
Is that a policy issue, or is it more of a how we organize the markets for VCs?
Yes and no. I think you could argue that, of course, VC in the United States tells you that it can be different because venture capital is all around. But the reason why venture capital is all around in the United States is not strictly a one-to-one because of the energy sector. It has to do with many, many other things in the innovation ecosystem of the United States, where the energy sector and energy startups actually benefit from things that are going on in the IT space and elsewhere, where the culture on venture capital is a very different one. We cannot change our approach, our culture overnight, I would think, in Europe. And so, yes, there is a role for policymaking here to help bridge that gap in order to bring these technologies into the market and the startups to scale.
And then finally, it's hard not to mention, this report lands in the world that's more turbulent than ever. You can see the collision between energy and trade and security in a way that we haven't seen for decades, basically. Against that sort of backdrop, how do you read your own numbers? Do you think we're sort of underestimating volatility as we go forward, or are these scenarios kind of robust even in this very turbulent world?
So scenarios are good in the year that you're designing them, and obviously you need to. We are collecting new data now for this year. We are in the process of thinking through the scenarios for this year as well, together with our colleagues in the World Energy Outlook team. So things will change here, obviously. But I think what is important now is that we are learning a couple of lessons from the crisis in the 1970s. And the 1970s, with all the difficulties that came with the global oil crisis at the time, led to many new things in the energy sector. Nuclear is one example, where the problem identified was a lot of oil use in the power sector, and so nuclear was scaled. RD&D was deemed a solution to, or the long-term solution to the oil security challenge, and it brought about many interesting technologies. I mentioned the battery example. There is solar PV and many, many more. We boosted innovation spending at the time, as I said. Efficiency of cars dropped by a factor, or improved by a factor of 2 at the time, as a result of company efforts, policy efforts that were being undertaken. So what is important now is not necessarily the robustness of the scenario finding here, in my view, because the technology landscape is what it is. We have the competitiveness gap is what it is. Doesn't change with the volatility here. But the important factor is, or the important question is, what lesson are we going to draw from past crises, and how are we going to respond to it policy-wise?
Thanks, Timur. Please have a seat, and I'll ask Tobias Hansson and Pia Sandvik up on stage, please. Tobias Hansson, you're the CEO of Hitachi Energy here in Sweden, right?
Sweden.
Yeah, and Pia, please have a seat. You can organize yourself. One left.
That will be very difficult. So many choices.
So I'll start with you, Pia. Now you've listened to Timur. What are your reflections from your perspective?
I mean, where we are for the moment, it's painful to see how dependent Europe is on fossil fuels. So we really have it under our skin for the moment, and that really, we have to move so much faster to get more fossil-free solutions. I mean, it's not going to work. So it's not just about having good energy solutions, it's also about resilience, I would say. So, yeah. So the report, of course, shows a lot of issues that we need to take care of. And I think Timur shows on some things that are really important to grasp. It's about the policy that works together in order to find good solutions. And I think from my point of view, being there a week now in China, you can see how fast they move, and we're an industry in the fourth seat. But it's a whole system that works together, where you also have, of course, we always say that, but they have so much money, they have state aid, but they use it efficiently. And I will also say that they are also using competition to pick the best ones. So, but we have to sort of take care of this independency. So I would say we have to move faster and find new ways of actually tackling this. And I think that regarding energy solutions, I would say that Sweden is quite well positioned as well. I mean, I think we're good at innovation, and we have many companies that can move fast, but we have to scale faster. I think this innovation gap the team also talked about, that we have good both basic research and applied research, but we have to get it faster into the market. And we talked about some of the depending on what technology, Timur showed that the production costs are lower, and they are so automated, as Timur also said, and they are moving faster all the time with this as well. And they measure. It's about measuring. I think we should put up more metrics of where should we be in 5 years, 10 years. So I think that the Swedish industry is well positioned, but it isn't enough. And then we know that we need to really have a stable energy system that produces energy when we need it to competitive prices. So of course, my wish would be that politicians, independently of what party they come from, really can agree on and saying this is not the thing that we're going to argue about, because it's so important for the competitiveness of industry.
Tobias, just first before we continue, for those who don't know you, who are you? Why do you?
Good question. This will be a long
Yeah, we'll have 45 minutes, so yeah.
So I'm representing Hitachi Energy then today, and a global player building grids, transmission and distribution grids, and all the elements and contexts towards that energy system. So we're also building, for example, energy storages, but buying batteries sometimes from China, and a player in building grids, basically.
And what's your take here after listening to Pia and Timur?
Yeah, no, I think this is a great report. Just starting with saying that it's a fantastic report. It must have been taking quite some time to pull it together because it's really a fact-based, extensive report that really I think is pinpointing the challenge of our days, maybe in an indirect way. But I think it really pinpoints that you have this threefold challenge today in the world, but also for Europe. Number one is, of course, the obvious one. Sustainability is still a challenge. The climate target is still not reached, and nothing has changed, even though we now spend most time on internally created disasters and crises. But this is still there, and there's still a massive driver behind our challenges. Number two is, of course, competitiveness that is very clearly pinpointed in this report, and there we need to do more. Crystal clear, a very large challenge for Europe and also for Sweden. Number three is, of course, what is maybe most obvious today, and that is the geopolitical madness, sorry to say it, that's going on right now with the crisis and even wars everywhere. And not least what we see now in the Middle East, where it becomes painfully obvious how dependent we are in Europe to fossil fuels. It's really in front of our face now that we have a huge dependency. And what I think is the common theme, knocking up open doors here, but electrification hitting all the three boxes. And China clearly understood this. China just look at their movement in a quite short number of years behind Europe in number of electrification in total energy system, and now far ahead of us. I think this is reflecting what we're seeing in the report, in what kind of disciplines they are investing in and really strategically are devoting money towards and policies making towards. And today, I mean, Europe is in a standstill. We've been at this 20 plus percentage now for a decade and not moving. And China is above 30% and have a clear target to reach higher. And it's going like a rocket. And I think this is coming back to the challenge of our days. But then I also want to make a statement, because the report is very clearly indicating our dependencies as Europe towards China. But we also have the opposite. We have disciplines, we have segments where we have a strong position in Europe. And that we also need to recognize and nurture moving forward. I represent one of those. And then I'm not speaking about Hitachi Energy. I'm speaking about Europe's capabilities within building grids, which is just massive. Europe is extremely strong here, and we have a large export to China in this aspect. Then it's still a little bit hurtful because China is doing it extremely smart and extremely well. Because when they do procurement from Europe, which they do a lot, because they're dependent on those disciplines, they buy new technology. They push the boundaries in every single project that then I speak about Hitachi Energy, that we win. They always have the element of the next level of innovation, the next level of smartness, because they want to move further in their competitiveness.
So, but just picking up there, because like you say, Hitachi Energy is an example where I think Sweden and Europe maybe more broadly has proven to be very competitive. Power transmission has been for a long time an area where we excel and we export. And how did that come about? What can we learn from that, and how can we defend that position and perhaps also move it to other sectors?
Yeah, I think it's coming from, it's a long story again, but it's coming from the heritage that we have and being the innovation, originally starting as the startup company by the end of 1800 and built a strong footprint locally over time and continue to invest and continue to nurture those businesses. But I think, again, it's hurtful sometimes to see what we're doing, because I think we just agree that electrification is some kind of bounding target moving forward and binding all these categories together and solving these challenges that we're facing as the world and as Europe. And then let me take one concrete example of what's happening in Europe today. We have a new regulation coming up, CBAM, maybe you heard about it. In our segment, this is...
What is CBAM, just for people?
Yeah, basically looking after how you import things and putting taxes on it if it's not in Europe, and then I'm over-exaggerating a little bit. But this is what we're facing. And what we see now in my business, and it goes across the business, not only Hitachi Energy, everybody that's producing, for example, power transformers within Europe, this is the key component in any grid. We are facing CBAM regulations on all the downstream material, meaning that if we buy copper or steel from outside of EU, we get CBAM punishment on that. We can understand the logic, I think, but the problem is that the complete product is not the part of CBAM, and it means ultimately that if you have production inside Europe, you get a 4 or 5% cost increase, and you lose competitiveness compared to an Asian supplier, Korean supplier, coming in and exporting to Europe. I guess this was not the target. I hope so. But this is what we're facing right now. And this type of madness we need to stop with.
Just to hold that thought a bit, is this a general problem with CBAM? Because the idea, like you say, is not that. The idea is to protect European producers of those components that you now currently import. Is this a general problem, or is it just for your particular transformer?
This specific case is for transformers. I cannot tell for every business, but this is what we're facing right now. And I have some hope in that we will be able to change it. But we have to spend a lot of time instead of working with our competitiveness and maybe the next product line that we will introduce and R&D. And this is sometimes I wonder, why do we do this?
So I want to pick up on that, because one of the most striking, I think, numbers in the report, or one of the striking numbers, is that massive increase in clean energy exports from China, almost doubling to 2035, and how I think the response now, CBAM is a good example where trade policy is kind of responding to what's happening elsewhere. Pia and Timur, maybe when you look at the current sort of policy environment, when we look back in hindsight, do you think this will look clumsy, or these are tariff-based, more protective responses, or is this a necessary way to deal with the situation that as it's evolving now? What's your take?
I think first, it's a good question. I think first and foremost, what is important is that trade policy is a means to an end. No, it's not a policy goal in itself. No, you're not putting up a trade policy in order to have a trade policy, but you want to achieve other objectives. And what I was trying to say is, as part of my presentation, is that different policy goals here are very intertwined. Climate policy, or climate objectives, energy policy goals, industrial policy goals. But sometimes there are trade-offs. Pushing ahead in one policy area might come at the expense at the other one. It's not that there is a win-win-win situation for every single policy goal. And trade policy, if designed well, can be a way to deal with the situation. But the key is if designed well for trade policy here.
It's a very diplomatic answer. If it's good policy, we could keep it. Yeah, that's great. So, Pia, do you have any thoughts here?
I think, of course, that is one tool that can be used, but I think that's not the way going forward. We have to work more about policies where we connect research, innovation, and technology to sort of get a better position than we have today all over Europe. Because otherwise we can't, it will be very problematic if we close the borders, and that's the way going forward. We won't be able to be competitive at all. So I think we really have to work to get these policies to come together. And as I think Tobias, he talks very well about the regulations that they are there for good reason, but it doesn't turn out well when it is applied. So we have to change the regulations all over as well. And of course it's also, and we know that if we look all over Europe regarding research, and now I'm not talking about market introduction connected to new technology, that's also too slow, but we don't put enough money into research. If you look at Europe overall, it's an average of 2.3% of GDP. And it's mostly put in the basic research at the universities. The industry is not there. So I mean, we have to work in so many areas faster, but it's all about getting products into the market and develop our technologies faster than we do today.
So I'm going to soon open up the floor to questions, so be prepared. So just before we do that, just a question around this market hegemony we see from China, and the need, or is there a need for European manufacturers to retain the market share? And of course, I know you personally, Timur, has worked a lot with the transport sector, for example. Looking at the electric car market now, it's just rapidly eclipsing everything that we've seen before. So how should we think about that? How much of a, it's a huge issue, of course, not least in Sweden, where we have a sort of Chinese-owned car manufacturer, but also in Germany and Italy and France, where you have a lot of manufacturing. How important is it, given what you, for example, said on partnership and so forth, that we actually retain that market share in Europe? And also from Pia, you can think about this. This is one of your members, Volvo Cars. I don't think they're in the room, but how should we think about this?
Very important question, if you ask me, Marcus. I mean, there is one of these other buzzword type of statements in the policy arena in the last 2 years or so, is that decarbonization should not mean deindustrialization. And I think this is completely right in many different regards. When you look at the clean tech space and all the technologies that I've spoken about, it is somehow one thing that Europe pushed ahead in the solar PV space and started deployment, etc. Put a lot of feed-in tariffs into the system, a lot of taxpayer money, and then lost the technology in a way to China. And China is dominating now the entire market. That was a prospective opportunity for when it comes to a new market that Europe could have championed, but in the end did not champion. It's an entirely different story when it comes to the car industry, which is the bread and butter of the European economy, and not only because of the cars that are being produced, but also because the steel that is needed, because of the aluminium that is needed, because of the entire car industry ecosystem around it, from gears to brakes, tires, and all these kind of things that are being produced, engines, cylinders, and all this. There are a lot of suppliers that depend on the very success of that car industry. That's jobs, that's economic growth, etc. So this industry to be under pressure now from another country that has moved quicker into a technology that appears to be superior is a big challenge in my view for Europe. And I don't think this is something that it's neither easily addressed, but it's not easily addressed, but it has to be addressed. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's from our point of view and our member companies as well, there's no path to walk except the one that's more sustainable. And I would like to take an example, because we visited Xiaomi, who is from the beginning a smartphone company. In 2021, they decided that they should start to produce EVs. And they picked a team with people from all over the world. For example, they took the BMW design manager, and 3 years later, they were ready to produce the cars. And they produced 500,000 cars in the 6 months coming thereafter. 91% of their facilities, the production lines, are automated. Elon Musk, he started mega casting, and they call it hybrid casting. So much of the car is actually done in blocks, huge blocks. And they are moving very, very fast, I would say. And they have targets of how large of the market they should be. Now we have to know that there are 50 EV companies in China for the moment, where 2 are actually having profit. So I'm regarding the competition. But that says something about how fast they really move. And this is the competition that the automotive industry will face in Europe as well. So I mean, we all know about the value chains, where there's so much of the whole system in Europe that relies on that, especially in Germany, I would say. So of course it's really problematic, but we have to. For me, there's no other path to walk than the ones that the Chinese has taken. But this says something about it, and I have to. Sometimes there's a power in words. Here in Sweden, we have been talking about that they have dark factories. And that's because it's so totally automated, so they close down, there are no lights. They call it intelligent factories. And that's interesting.
Right, so now time for questions. I have one from Bo Ditzfalusi. And so do you have a mic for Bo here? Yeah, you have a mic already. And then one behind there. So maybe just keep it short and one at a time, and we can take two questions and 2 or 3 people here on the panel.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marcus, and thank you very much, Timur, for an excellent presentation. So it's so nice to see 2 former colleagues on the scene. So I do have a question, but before that, I was just wondering why not nuclear energy is included in a report on clean energy technology. But that was not my question. My question relates to the overall picture of the global world demand for energy. So I remember when Marcus, under my supervision, made the second edition of this report back in 2010. At that time, the world's dependence on fossil fuel was around 80%. I mean, counting oil, gas, and coal. And to my best knowledge, that share is very similar today. So I was just wondering, are we really at a threshold? Are we at a turning point with all this turmoil? Or will we, in 15 years from now, will we still be having a share of 80% fossil fuels? So that was my question. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Before you answer that, we can take the question behind you there, Bo, if you hand the mic. Or you can just... I think it's you, yeah? Do you have a microphone? No? No question? Okay, we have one from Martin here.
Martin Wallstrand, Energiforsk. I was wondering 2 things. One, if you look at all these different energy technologies, if Europe should prioritize 1 or 2 that are really strategic to become more resilient, have more production in Europe, which ones would those be? And is it possible to decouple the software from hardware part and actually focus on more, I think the software could be more sensitive to control, but to still import hardware from more low-cost countries in China?
Great, so who wants to start?
Well, I can start with Bo's question, if that makes sense. So first of all, why nuclear is not included is because we focused on modular technologies that are in the market and where there are sophisticated supply chains already in place today. That's just not the case in the same way for nuclear, which are large-scale projects. There is, of course, SMRs in the making in many ways, but there are no supply chains in the same way. So it's a very simple analytical question rather than that we ask ourselves rather than anything around nuclear. But just to say that we have a chapter in the report that I personally I'm a big fan of. It's called 10 Key Questions for Clean Energy Technologies. Because we recognize that there are there's a lot of noise out there, and every day you have the impression there's something happening and the next breakthrough is coming, etc. And sometimes I feel it is important to understand what is the signal here and not what's the noise. And so we put together a couple of 10 key questions, and there's one certainly dealing with nuclear and indeed fusion as well. In our State of Energy Innovation report, we have a whole chapter on fusion on top. When it comes to the share of fossil fuels in 15 years of time, I'm very glad that I'm working in scenario making, not in forecasting, so I cannot tell you. But as I said earlier, I think a lot will depend on how policymakers will react to the crisis that we're currently seeing. There are a lot of analogies to the 1970s. There are some things that don't work so well in terms of analogies, I have to say, in particular on how we respond to things as consumers and how we are feeling the pressure on a daily basis, apart from high prices at the pump. But the policy responses that will be designed today and the lessons that we can learn from past crises will certainly determine what is the share of fossil fuels in 15 years of time. And I should just say that for some countries, clean energy is energy security. For others, maybe not, but for many, in particular the resource-poor regions, clean energy is an energy security strategy. And the technology opportunity, the technology portfolio that we have in our hand today relative to the late 1970s is much, much broader, and so the opportunity space for dealing with this through the energy security lens much larger. I'll pause here maybe. Happy also to respond to the other question, but if anyone wants to go first, happy to.
Tobias, do you have any thoughts here?
I mean, maybe a little bit outside my normal turf, but I would say that I still believe in that there is going to be global value chains moving forward as well. I think it's even, it would be a little bit naive to think that we're going to build up everything and do this as an island and we are 100% self-sufficient here and don't talk to the rest of the world. I think that this is not the way. But then, on the other hand, if you draw your SWOT analysis, this is common stuff for any company. What are your strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats? We know that it's always easiest to take the strong points and make them even stronger. And there I just wave the flag of grids. Grids is one. Strong point in Europe, we can do more. And there is, of course, many, many others. And we need to put them on the radar and make them stronger and safeguard them as strength moving forward. And then, yes, we have to take a couple of the weaknesses. Let's say batteries. At least that would be a spontaneous one that makes sense. Maybe halvledare, what's that in English? Semiconductors, correct. And there is a couple of them that make sense to go for and establish also more thoroughly in Europe. But I'm not the one to say which are we need to play the bets on the right things and not go all in with everything at once. I think this is clear. And this is also what China is doing.
Yeah.
No, just regarding the energy system, I think the path for Sweden to go further on, if we take a Swedish perspective on this, I think we have water power. Now we're going to build new nuclear, and it's good to have stable energy solutions as well, combined with the new energy sources as well. So I think it's really important to have all of it because that creates stability and less of vulnerability as well.
Just while you're thinking about your next question here, a question to you, Tobias, around the resilience of value chains and supply chains. Transformers, of course, is one of the products that globally is pointed to as a major bottleneck in some areas, and you, of course, are one of the major manufacturers of transformers. Well, first of all, how does your order book look like? Is this pretty full, I suspect? And what's keeping you awake at night around bottlenecks for your own supply chains? You related before the CBAM being a problem and so forth. So how's your situation there?
No, I mean, it's a strong backlog, yes. That's just confirming it. And the market is extremely strong. I can just echo what was shown on the graph before. We see also the 2 times, 3 times, and even 4 times moving ahead. The market will continue to grow. That's crystal clear. And here and now, yes, demand is higher than capacity. So what are we doing? I mean, we're building up capacity. We're investing in factories across Europe. I think we're now in 6 EU member states, massive investments from our company, but I know competitors doing the same. So it's a build-up right now, and also very much located in Europe. Of course, in other countries as well, but in Europe it's a massive, the largest piece of the investments is happening here. And then coming back to the CFAM again, because I'm just saying the obvious thing here, that we're global players. Me and my competitors are global players. We're present in 60 countries. It would be the logical and easiest decision ever to say that, okay, if you get 4 or 5% cost increase if you produce in Europe, if you're punished by that, you move outside. You move it to a factory outside the EU and you import it. That's the easiest thing to do, but it would not be good because it goes against our target to grow in Europe and to create competitiveness and great jobs and welfare.
Okay, so we have one question there and then one to the left here. And then I think we close the question for... we can have some time for our politicians as well. So first we have Philip and then Jan-Olof.
I'm going? Yeah. So Mats Lindlöf, founder of an energy startup. So one question, I mean, we had famous projects, industrial projects here in Sweden that have struggled within attacking the battery space and specifically a lot of the midstream challenges on supply chain. But what can we do differently to make these projects succeed, and what can we do to ensure that we can actually build up new industries and help alleviate these weak links in the supply chain?
Thank you. And then we have one question here from Jan-Olof Jacke, I think. Do you have a microphone here? And then unfortunately we have to draw the line. We're going to have some light lunch afterwards, so I'm sure people will be staying behind. Please go ahead.
Thank you for an excellent presentation and report, really. One just factual question, which is when you look at market share for geographies, do you count the geography itself or the ownership? Meaning cattle in Hungary, for instance, is that Europe or is it China? Just for fact. But the real question came to the slide you showed on cost advantages that China has. And if you then think about Europe as having very, very different electricity costs in different countries, what's your thinking on how relevant European policies would be versus national? I think it was on solar wafers, for instance, you had the vast majority of the cost advantage was on energy. That would suggest that some countries, like this country, should be able to be competitive. So just some thoughts around relevance of national versus European policies.
Right, who wants to go first? We have one question from Mats from the startup scene and then the cabinets here. Timur, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start maybe with the easy question, which is on the geography. So what I showed is by country, no production in the country. So there is a lot of, I mean, China's dominance here is built by Chinese companies operating in China, essentially, and then exporting. But we have both. No? So we have both type of information. So we are collecting information about different industrial players operating in different regions, and we have a report actually that we released last November, which is called "What Next for the Global Car Industry," which I can only recommend to everyone because I think it's a very useful report where we looked into these kind of questions a bit more in depth, where, for example, you understand why the Southeast Asian situation. 80% of car sales in Southeast Asia are internal combustion engine vehicles, are actually Japanese produced. And now there is a huge influx of electric cars into the region exported from China. So you understand when you're looking at these kind of things a bit through these two different lenses, by country and by company, you understand a lot of those market dynamics in much more depth, and I think it's very instructive in many ways. When it comes to electricity cost, I think I'm not sure I have a good answer here, to be honest. There is of course, there is an important place for Europe and all this, but part of the important place for Europe is also to leverage on the strength of different countries, of course. And the decision for Sweden to invest into solar PV manufacturing or not is not necessarily one that is decided by policy making, and that is a bit more broader in around electricity costs in a single country. In fact, many companies are, when you look at the car industry, for example, they're producing in Eastern Europe because certain location factor, Standortfaktoren, we call it in German, location-specific factors are very favorable there. So I think that's a rather normal thing. When it comes to the battery projects, there is a lot to learn from the Northvolt example, of course. There's a lot to learn. This is also very instructive on the depth of the strength of the Chinese industry here, not only by the technology itself, but also by the automation process and how these kind of things have been operating there. I'm not sure there is an easy answer for the battery community for Europe. The Asian actors here, Chinese, but also Japanese and Koreans, are extremely advanced in many ways, both on the technology but also on the manufacturing process. And so what we've been trying to encourage is a bit thinking through operational models in which you can cooperate with the Asian actors in a way in order to learn the technology a bit better, I should say. And perhaps also to pick up on the earlier question about the technologies to prioritize. Battery is not a technology that Europe should be losing on. It's not only, I'm not talking about cars here alone, but this is power sector, this is military operations, defense, it's various different other areas. So I would certainly try to find a way to make that work.
Thank you. That's a very comprehensive answer. I'm sure we're going to have more answers and more conversations to be had. But now I'd like to invite first thanks the panel. Thank you very much. And now please welcome, we have Jesper Skalberg Karlsson from Moderaterna and Anders Ådahl from Centerpartiet. Glad to have you here. Thanks for taking the time. So starting with you, Jesper, just what's your thoughts here after hearing the conversations and reading the report?
I think what this discussion has really shown us is that, looking back, I think more has happened in the last 3 months more than in the upcoming decades. So you look like you're born in the 80s, perhaps 70s.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Yes.
So I think in
made my day already. Yeah.
In the last 3 months, you have seen the U.S. bombing Iran with their oil reserves being depleted, even before. You have seen the new Xiaomi SU7, which was mentioned before, the new revised model, which is a car from a cell phone company that could wipe out, the industrial base of Germany. You have seen the new CATL batteries that turns the secondary market within EVs into, well, let's call it for what it is. It's a bloodbath, perhaps. So a lot of things are happening, and I think Timur's job is not getting easier. There are more scenarios being looked into now than perhaps ever before. So troubling times, and I think this discussion is very welcome. Are we going to stay the course and pick up the pace, or are we going to go out on our own little adventure?
Anders Ådahl.
Well, for the first, I would say that it's rather obvious that the future is dominated by two main pathways. One is the digital pathway and the other one is the green pathway. And it's rather obvious when now having the opportunity with this report to look back on what China had done the last 10, 15 years, that they realized that the world will be green around the corner, and they understood that if we go for that development, we can also grow our own economy. And now we sit in a situation where we tend to discuss in Europe and in Sweden as well that we are so dependent on fossil fuels and we need to deviate from that. Now we realize also that we are so dependent of energy technologies and other technologies as well, not least from, in this case, from China. So I would say that what strikes me is that politicians, we need to try to see what's coming in 10, 15 years and try to develop a policy for that and not just look on what is happening right now. So that is the most striking with this report, I would say.
And so also, I often hear this, and we heard today also, that technology policy, R&D policy is sort of interwoven with our future competitiveness. And Pia Sandvik made a strong case for us we need to be more active. But it's more rare, I think, that you hear, what does that actually mean? What is, in concrete terms, what should we do differently in terms of policy? I realize this is a big question, but it's a hard one. So you can, but yeah, maybe Anders, since you mentioned, what do you mean when you say more technology policy?
No, I mean that I think Pia also mentioned that we need to be better in combining different areas in politics. We need to combine industrial policy with research policy, with innovation policy, and like that. For example, the speed of innovation is so fast that we need now perhaps to combine the research policy with the innovation policy and business policy, because the development is happening at the same time. So we should also discuss what would the role be for the universities tomorrow. If comparing with the AI development, for example, the most prime researchers, they are in the companies and not in the universities, and what will happen in other areas as well. So combining different policy areas and trying to have a broader picture would be my way to go.
Jesper?
Yeah, I think there's, it's fair to say that there needs to be some sort of shift in policy making. So I don't believe we are to point out a sector that we're going to be number one in 5 years, but I think there is some things that can be done regarding, just the scale of how we use public funds for research, development, and innovation. I think also that we should look into how we can get more use out of that money, rather than putting taxpayer money into installing other technical solutions from other countries. We should invest more money into developing the new technical innovations. So there's a policy shift to be made, but I don't think that we can point just one finger and say in 10 years we're going to be number one within this sector or this sector.
A comment on that as well would be, perhaps we have mentioned the word supply chain or value chain several times today, and Swedish policy is steered towards sectors, the energy sector, the housing sector, and so forth. Perhaps we should work more on different kind of value chains instead, and try to understand the value chains instead of separate sectors, because it is in the value chains and the weakest chain, as Timur also pointed out, that actually defines our competitiveness. So that would be something for us to work with as well.
But when I listen to you, Anders, I know you've got a background in academia as well, so you know this well. But it sounds a little bit to me like you asking the politicians to pick winners. You're saying that again, we should focus our attention to
No.
Okay.
No, not at all.
Can you then elaborate, when you say you need to sort of combine business policy with research, how's that combination? What does that mean if it doesn't mean pouring more money into something that you believe will be successful in the future?
Curiosity-driven research is tremendously important. When I worked at Chalmers, being responsible for the energy area of advance, we worked heavily on making the industrial companies, for example, Hitachi Energy, sit around the same table as the basic science researchers, discussing what are your challenges, what are my challenges, what can we find here together. So it's about creating environments and creating support on these kind of arenas where things can happen at the same time. So, because you are tremendously right. Curiosity-driven, free science is tremendously important for our development. Should not argue about that.
All right, then I'll shift a little bit back to this. So this worry that we're falling behind, and what we're building our welfare systems on right now won't work in the future. Yes, but when you see these sort of scenarios where the dominance of China is just rising and our dependence on technologies that we're going to import for a long time, how can we stay competitive as a welfare nation in Sweden?
First of all, I think it's very fair to say that if we are letting China build our electric vehicles for quite some time, they're going to get really good at doing it. So I follow these Tesla forums from time to time, and there are a lot of users there who are looking to the VIN numbers to make sure that their car is from Shanghai and not Fremont because it has a better build quality. So it's not just about the price or proximity, it's about if you do something for a long time with a high level of precision, you get really good at it. So I think from my perspective, we are falling behind, and we have been for quite some time. I think when it comes to competitiveness, there are different things that needs to be done, and Timur showed it in a very nice way that within different sectors there are different things that needs to be like on top of the list. So I think what we can do from our Swedish perspective is to make sure that the European Union puts competitiveness on the top of their agenda. I think the omnibus packages that needs to be increased, tenfold, and we need to not just
What's the omnibus package?
Omnibus packages comes down to cutting regulations to make sure that we can, pick up the pace in Europe, get back to work. I think also we shouldn't be celebrating, the 1-year anniversary of the Mario Draghi report. We should be getting to work and, implementing a lot of his recommendations. And then, there are different things that needs to be done within different countries. For example, the Italian national debt is way too high, the Greek one as well. We are looking into countries like Italy, for example, very dependent on natural gas. We are seeing this abhorrent housewife culture in some European countries. We need to get women into the workforce. We need to work 8 hours a day for 5 days a week to make sure that we are competitive. In China, they're talking about 996. I don't think that's very productive or healthy, but we need to make sure that Europe is not just a museum that others can visit, but rather an industrial powerhouse where we are getting things done. So I think also looking ahead, Germany is not on track to be the industrial powerhouse that we want them and need them to be, with an economy that has been shrinking for 2 years. That's just not good enough. So we need to stay the course, pick up the pace, and get things done.
Well, isn't there a tension, like Tobias Hansson, he made a point of the value chains being global and business being global, and still we have this tension between, not least the German car industry calling for at least some parts of it more protective measures and so forth. And so to what extent do you think that maybe Sweden and Europe should go it alone, and to what extent should we build partnerships so that go beyond maybe the preferences of the German car industry? Starting with you, Anders.
I believe we should. I mean, we have a very strong and beautiful industrial history in Sweden, and we are so strong. And I do believe that we should be a strong Sweden in a strong Europe, because we cannot work forward on our own. We need to work together with the countries of Europe. And of course, there is a geopolitical situation that is troublesome these days. But as Pia also said, I think we have to believe in free trade and like that, and work in that direction. So I'm quite positive actually, because what Europe really realized now when the Draghi report came is that, okay, we are in a tough situation, but now politicians across Europe understand that we need to work together towards a better future. So I'm quite happy with the situation actually.
Okay, Jesper, you get the last word here.
Yeah, free trade needs to be fair as well. So we can't have free trade with countries that don't respect the WTO agreements. And I think it was very well said by Mark Carney in the Economic Forum in Davos that middle powers now need to combine, need to cooperate. Because if the larger countries like the US of A and China are not open for fair business, we need to look elsewhere. And I think looking to Canada, looking to Brazil, looking to many other middle powers is perhaps the only door that is open to us. So we're going to have to open that door.
Thanks again for taking the time, and good luck ahead of the elections. Thank you. Pia, do you want to say something?
Note that we didn't argue.
Right, we're nearing the close of this session, so Thanks all for coming. I'm just going to leave the floor to Pia again for some closing remarks. Just a few personal reflections. I think it's interesting to see this report that I've known for a long time, as Bo pointed out. It now reads much more like a sort of strategic map of who's doing what, who's building what, who owns the resources, than what used to be more of a technology catalog. And I think that mirrors the shift that we're seeing in the energy space more generally. I see it, I know you do too. I'm sure in my everyday work, I work with large data centers, and there, what used to be just an engineering problem is now about security, who ships the components inside the data center, who owns the computing power that we build them for, and all this kind of points to this impossibility of keeping apart security, energy, engineering problems with trade, industrial policy, and so forth. So it's interesting to see, I think. So with that, thanks a lot for coming, and Pia, the floor is yours for closing remarks.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you for being an excellent moderator. And I'm very pleased that we have had the possibility to host this meeting today with IEA's report. Timur is not here, but I thank him anyway. He's having an interview with Television 4 here. But I think somehow the report is scary, but at the same time, I think that really creates sense of urgency and the necessity that we have to change. And if the report isn't enough, we have Hormuzsundet. So, I mean, there are so many reasons that we really have to change now to get an energy system that is working in Sweden, across all over Europe, because that will be part of our competitiveness, or our security and our resilience. So I'm very happy for being hosting this seminar here at Teknikföretagen or Technology Institute of Sweden, but at the same time, it's scary. But as we do in Sweden, when we have a challenge, we mobilize and we get the solutions in place. So we have to work together, of course, with the EU as well with this. So thank you for visiting us. Thank you for all of those that are online as well. There's a possibility to mingle and to discuss more, and perhaps we can also just during this mingle find some good paths to walk forward. Thank you.